In this video, we're going to cover every single step you need to go through in order to build, launch, and scale your no-code app-based business. And make sure you stick around until the end, because we're also going to talk about the steps that most people skip and what you and your ultimate success is at risk of if you skip these steps too. So we're going to dive right in. But first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding. So what we're going to do is jump over to the whiteboard, and we're going to dive into this. So first, you are in the right place if you have, number one, identified a problem in your target market, in your industry, and number two, you have a solution in mind to solve that problem that will come in the form of an app. So it's important to understand that you don't just have the app idea. You have identified a problem first that you have a solution for, or that you have an idea that you can create a solution for, and that solution comes in the form of an app. Now, if you have these two things, then you need to move into the next step so that you can ultimately reach the point of having a reliable, scalable, app-based business without having to be a technical co-founder, without having to do any coding. Okay, so what we're going to do is break this into 4 different kind of categories here and these are the steps that you need to go through. So number one, you need to go through a process of validation. Now, this can look different for different people. A lot of people assume that validation just kind of looks the same across the board, and that's just not the case. There are really 2 types of validation that you can be looking at. So number one, if you are trying to validate an app or an app idea and you don't have experience in the industry that the app is for, or with the target market that the app will be serving. Okay, so you essentially have no experience. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that you really need to do your homework, and you need to go through the proper steps to make sure that you aren't cutting any corners and ultimately wasting time, resources, effort, money, and all of those types of things. So if you don't have experience in the industry that you're building your app for, that's kind of a different route that you need to go down, but we'll talk more about it. And the second is if you do have that experience, right? So if you are an industry expert, and I usually refer to people as industry experts when their careers are in that industry, when they have been working in that industry, or if their app idea is not related to businesses, if they are an active, long-time consumer in that industry. And so they have lots of knowledge, they have expertise, they have experience, they have contacts, maybe they're in communities related to the industry, whatever it may be. They can classify themselves as an industry expert, or they are a business owner. So maybe they own a small consultancy, a small agency, something like that. And so they're building an app that solves a problem that they themselves likely deal with day in and out. Maybe this is an app that will help them take the services they provide and package them into a more scalable or a productized solution, right? They're packaging their services into an app, or maybe they're just adding on a new revenue stream in the form of an app alongside their services. Okay, so when you're in this first stage, or this first step of validation, the way or the path you take depends on which of those categories you fall into. Now, if you fall into the category where you really don't have any experience, you had an idea and you're kind of exploring the idea in and of itself. You need to make sure that there's even a need for the app in the first place, because you don't have that experience. So maybe you have an idea and it's a cool idea, it sounds cool, but how do you know that people actually need or want or will use an app like that? So if that's you, then you need to spend a lot of time in this validation stage. You need to do something like build a prototype. And when I say build a prototype, this doesn't have to be anything extensive. A prototype is essentially something that conveys your idea. So I'm talking about maybe even something as simple as a set of landing pages that just conveys your idea, or wireframes that conveys the idea, so that you can start talking to people, having actual conversations with your intended target market to show them what you have in mind, to ask them, would this solve whatever problem it's intended to solve? Or if not, how could you solve that problem? Or does that problem even really need to be solved, or is it already being solved? Another way, right, there are lots of things that you need to figure out if you don't have experience in this industry. And so this validation step is really big for you. Now, if you do have that experience, or if you're the industry expert, or if you are the business owner, then this step can look a little bit different for you, because you likely don't need to build a prototype. And the reason is because either, number one, you yourself deal with the problem that you're solving day in and out, either in your personal life or in your business or in your career or whatever it may be. And so that validation is mostly already there. Maybe you can have some conversations, that would be great. But your colleagues, your coworkers, your contacts, connections, people who you interact with in your community within this industry, you're probably already talking about this with them. Not necessarily your app idea, but about the problem, about the things that this problem causes, or the struggles that this problem causes. And you probably are already aware of existing solutions that maybe don't really cut it, that just aren't good enough. And so you already have a lot of validation. You don't need to spend as much time here. Chances are you could probably use this app yourself, or a lot of people already who could. So once you have gone through this stage of validation, and we're going to talk more about a different type of validation in a minute, what you're going to move into then is creating the first version of your app. And now I'm calling this the first version because you can put a lot of different terms into this step. You can call it a minimum viable product. You can call it a minimum marketable product. You can call it a minimum lovable product. You can call it lots of different things, depending on partly what you have learned through that validation stage, and also the experience you have coming into this. What's your expertise? What's your knowledge? Everything that we've already talked about, right? That industry experience. It's going to partly depend on that. We're just going to call it your first version. This is the first working version of your app. So you're not building a prototype. You're not building something that just conveys your idea. You're building the first version. Now, there are a couple different paths you can take here as well, depending on the type of expertise you're coming in with. So we're going back over to these two categories here. So if you are coming into this with industry experience, you work in the industry, you interact with the industry, you know the target market, you know the problems, you already know existing solutions, if there are any, maybe you use them, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, if that's you, and you already have that validation, right? You already have people who could be your potential first users. You have those contacts, those colleagues, those types of people. Well, then what you're likely going to want to do is, when you move into your first version, you need to actually build the first version of the product that you then want to scale. Now, here's what I mean by that. If you don't have a lot of validation, so if you are maybe this person who doesn't have a lot of experience or knowledge in the industry, you just don't have a lot of validation, maybe you didn't get a lot of validation in this stage up here, but you're moving forward anyways. If that's you, then you don't need to focus quite as much on the quality of the first version of your app, because chances are it's just going to be an extension of validating your idea in the first place, right? But on the other hand, if you have that initial validation, you know the problem is there, you know the problem needs to be solved, you want to build a first version of your app that you're then going to turn around and scale. In other words, you don't want to, once you start bringing users on board, you don't want to have to turn around and rebuild it. Okay, if that's you, then when you build your first version, you're going to be focusing on a few different things, right? So number one, you need to start with the right strategy. Now, if you're building the first version of an app, no matter who you are, you need to have the right strategy. But I'm going to specifically right now talk to this person who is that industry expert, that maybe a business owner, someone who has that existing knowledge, right? You need to go in with the right strategy. There's a certain order in which you need to build features of your app. Basically, you need to build the right things at the right time and in the right order. And you have to form a strategy around how you're going to go through the development phases of your app. And now this can seem kind of simple, but in reality, it's going to depend on your target market. We split up with our own clients, we split up their development phases based on the different needs of their target market, based on the specific problem that they're solving, based on the specific solution that they're providing. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into building the right things at the right time in the right order. And so you need to create sort of a roadmap. And we have other videos where we go into how to create a roadmap for your app's development and launch. You need to have a roadmap going into it so that you know that you are, again, building the right things at the right time and in the right order. Because if you don't, a few things can happen. Number one, you can essentially fall victim to scope creep. And you can go into this thinking, I'm only going to build the things I need to build, but inevitably, if you don't have the right strategy or roadmap going in, you're going to fall victim to scope creep. Your time frame for development is going to expand really quickly. Your launch date is going to keep getting pushed back farther and farther and farther. And unfortunately, I see a lot of people who, when they fail to have this strategy or this plan going in, they just never launch because they never get to a point where they feel like they can launch because they never had that point clearly defined in the first place. So you need that strategy. And then the next thing you need is the right structure for your app. So remember that we're talking about a first version that you can then scale, not a first version that you are just kind of throwing together to do some research and then you want to rebuild later. No, this is the first version that you're then going to just transition straight into your business and into scaling your business. So you need to make sure that the structure is sound. You can compare this to building a house and laying a solid foundation on which you will build that house, right? It has to support everything else that you're going to build moving forward. Any renovations that you're going to do, any additions that you're going to make, that foundation is always going to be there. And if the foundation is not solid, then nothing else is going to be reliable. It's not going to be scalable. So we have to focus on the structure. A lot of this revolves around your data, around your workflow, so the logic of your app, how you create all of those, how you create the overall architecture of your app. And when you start focusing on scalability of an app from the very beginning, then what you're going to enable yourself to do is essentially plan for future features, future functionality, and make sure that from the start you're building an app that will allow, when your app scales, it will allow the performance to still be good. You want to be able to bring on more users. You want to be able to add more features, more functionality with the app still performing well, right? You don't want to end up giving your users a bad or disjointed or even broken experience just because your app is doing well and growing. You don't want to reverse that progress. So all of that starts with the structure. You have to make sure the structure is sound so that all that future growth and scale can actually happen. And you don't then have to go back and reverse. So then we look at the systems. Now, this is a term that we like to use to essentially describe the if this then that components of your app. So if this happens on the front end, for example, then this will happen on the back end. So if you compare this to building a house again, right, you have that foundation. Systems are things like the electrical wiring or the plumbing. So if I turn this knob on my sink, then the water will come out. If I flip this switch on the wall, then the light will turn on. It's essentially making sure that everything communicates, right? So you have to make sure that everything is communicating correctly, because you obviously want your app to work in a seamless way, and you want to start building more and more of that in. So when you have the strategy, you have the structure. So you kind of have the framework in place. Well, now you need to start expanding all of that more niche and custom functionality, and you need to make sure it works and that it is being layered on top of that initial foundation or that initial structure correctly, so that again, your app is scalable. And then when you do those things, you can start to think about and plan for the actual scale. So this is what's going to take us into the next step, right? So again, now we have this first version. Now, the next step that you're going to go into is really your testing. And there are two main types of testing that you need to go through. And really there are kind of three. So we'll go through all three of those. What you need to do is first, you need to do what's called alpha testing. And this is the category which really is kind of broken up into two categories. So alpha testing is really just making sure that this first version over here, right, that it works, that it's functioning, and that it works well, that it's performing well, that everything has been created and as it should, and that it's performing as it should. Now, when you're doing this testing, you can do this from a developer standpoint, so from kind of a back-end standpoint, and you can do this from a user standpoint. So you can go through your testing from both perspectives and make sure everything is working. And this is actually a more extensive process that we take our own clients through, because the building that first version and getting that strategy, structure, and the systems and everything all correct is obviously all very important. Each of these steps are important. But the testing is one of the things that a lot of people kind of graze over. And it causes a lot of problems when they get to the next step. So if you go through this correctly, then you can move into the beta testing. And the beta testing is really when you start bringing users consistently into your app, or rather you have them consistently using the app. And so we're not just testing for functionality, now we're testing for effectiveness and for adoption. Are users actually able to consistently use this, to consistently and effectively solve the problem that it has been created to solve? And if the app is solving that problem well, then you can move directly into this final stage, which is really ongoing, and that is the stage at which you will start to scale and continue to scale. So once you get to that beta testing, you can think of just kind of expanding out in waves, and there are different strategies that you can carry into your beta testing. We won't cover all of those here, but just know that you need to go through that. And when you do, you can move into scaling the app. And again, scaling is really, you can look at this in two ways. One, you're scaling the user base. So you're bringing on more users, or maybe more user types. That's another aspect that you want to consider as well. And additional features and functionality. And these are things that you will sort of, you'll use your testing to dictate, right? This isn't the time when you just start building everything else that you want to add into the app, all the cool ideas that you've ever had for the app. Not the time for that. This is the time when you actually take what you've learned in this testing stage over here and you apply it directly to the next, because you don't want to move forward with your app based on guesses or assumptions. You can have your assumptions. You want to make sure they're educated, but you don't just want to rely on those. You want to back those up with data and statistics. And the way in which you can do that is by talking to your users, by doing that beta testing, actually having conversations with them, really getting their feedback, implementing effective and consistent feedback loops so that you, again, can just take that into scaling the app. Now, aside from just looking at the technical side of scaling your app, right? Maybe the user types or the features and the functionality. This is also when you're going to be focusing a lot on the business components. Now, this is something that you kind of have to work with in combination throughout all of these stages, but there's a certain time when you want to focus more of your time, effort, and money on it. And that is when you get over to this step. Now, again, that's not saying you're ignoring it leading up to that. This is just when you can really start focusing on it more in an effective way. And the reason I say that is because the testing over here, it's not just what guides the features, the functionality, the updates, the changes to your app from a technical standpoint. It's also what guides things like your messaging, your marketing, your sales, your target market, the segments that you want to target. Maybe you want to segment down. Maybe you get that feedback that allows you to become even more niche, and maybe you can grow more quickly by doing that. So again, we're also now focusing on your messaging, your marketing. Your messaging goes into your sales, the copy you're putting on your app, the way in which, even, I'm going to add this, even your design, because, you know, just like the feedback that you're getting to guide the features and the functionality that you're building, you want that to guide your design too, your messaging, your marketing, your sales, your design. You want your app to be functional, you want it to be effective, you want it to be easy to use, and your design plays a massive role in that. Design isn't just about making things look good, it's about making things more functional, making things easier to use, making things more convenient to use. And you do that in this scale step. Now, what I want to talk about next is what most people skip, right? There's a lot of steps here. And I would say, as I'll go out on a limb and say 95% of people skip almost every single one of these steps. What most people try to do is, I'm actually going to zoom out here, and we're going to add in this stage over here. Okay. So let's say we have this very initial stage now, before you even get to this validation step, right? You just have your idea, okay? And I'm going to zoom out even farther so I can fit this. Let's say we are all the way over here, and now not only have we scaled the app, not only have we honed in on the marketing, the messaging, the sales, the design, all of these things, but now we have this full scope app, this really big, really successful business, right? That's on this other end, okay? So what most people do is they go from this idea stage, or rather they try to go from this idea stage all the way over to there. in kind of one big leap. And a lot of things happen when you do that. Number one, if you are the type of person without that industry experience or knowledge, you don't work in the industry, you don't really have specific ties to it. If you try to go from just having this idea all the way over to now having this kind of like an overnight success of a business, it's just not going to work. I mean, maybe there is some unicorn situation in which it might, but realistically, it's just not going to work because you don't have each of these things. You don't have the validation. You don't have that first version that you've actually tested and gotten feedback on. You haven't used feedback in order to hone in on your messaging, marketing, sales, design, your user base, your features, functionality, your target market. You don't have any of that knowledge or any of that feedback or data. It's really, really, really hard to do it. Now, let's say you do have initial validation without having a prototype, right? You're the type of person who has all of that industry knowledge, that experience. If you try to go from just having your idea to now having this successful business up and running almost overnight, you're still missing out on all of these things. And primarily, what's going to be most kind of damaging to you is these two steps right here. Building the first version and then testing it and getting the feedback, right? Because for you, you already have a lot of this validation. And so you don't necessarily need to spend as much time in that, because realistically, you've probably spent a lot of time in that unintentionally, just by doing the work that you're doing or using the solutions that you currently use or whatever it may be. Probably over time have just developed that validation, right? Had the conversations, you have the knowledge, right? And because of that, it's easy to think that you also have all of this knowledge over here on the right side, that you already have the knowledge for the messaging, the marketing, the sales, the design, all of that. But the reality is, well, you might not necessarily need to go really deep into this initial validation step kind of separately. You do need to go deep into these, again, these initial or these middle two steps, because you still need to validate your product. Now, this is not validating your idea, right? You already know the problem, you already know the solution, you already have the validation. Maybe you can even self-validate, but you still have to validate the product. I mean, think about it this way. We as a company at Coaching No Code Apps, we use different internal tools to help run our business. And for a really big section of the business, or a really big component, with our Built to Scale program, where we work with our clients, we developed our own app so that we could create a custom internal system to help our business run and to help run the program, and to make sure that our clients are all getting the results they're coming in to get, right? So we developed this app. Now, the validation is obviously there. We're already using different solutions to run our processes, but we had different problems that kind of were related to all those existing solutions. They didn't solve, or they didn't run our processes exactly how we wanted. So we created our own, and we created it exactly how we thought we would need it. But as soon as we started using it, we realized, oh, okay, this feature needs to actually be different, because in theory, it should work perfectly. But in practice, it doesn't. It needs to be used in a different way, or maybe in a different order, or maybe there's just a better way of doing it, or maybe we can eliminate something, or maybe we need to add this thing that we didn't even realize we needed to add until we started using it. So regardless of the validation that you have, or the insight that you think you have over on this side with the messaging, the marketing, the extra features and functionality, you still have to go through and validate the product. Now, that's not to say that you won't end up using the app, but you just need to validate the next direction that you're going to take. You need to validate whether you need to make different changes to the app, different iterations, all that kind of stuff. You still have to go through this testing. You have to go through the alpha testing. You have to go through the beta testing. We did that with our internal app as well, with ourselves as the users, through the alpha testing, through the beta testing, through different phases of the beta testing. Because if you try to just jump from one end of this all the way to the other, you're missing out on all of the feedback, whether that feedback is coming from you internally or whether it's coming from your users, whatever it may be. You have to have it in order to move forward. And the risk of not having it is, to put it really simply, it's just wasting time. It's wasting money. It's wasting focus. It's wasting energy. It's, you're busy. You have lots of things going on. You have a successful career, a job. Maybe you have your own business. You have a family. You have a life. You have other things going on. And so you can, but why would you want to waste all that time, all that focus on all that energy, all that money when you don't have to, right? And so I'm emphasizing this a lot because, again, most people skip this. Most people skip it. And then what happens is when they try to get over to this far end on the right, they don't. They don't, because they don't have, they never get the right messaging. They never get the messaging down. So they never get the right marketing. They're never able to effectively market their app. So they can't bring new users in the doors consistently. They never get their sales right. So for the prospective users that they do bring in, they don't convert them very well. The design isn't right. The app isn't, it's not useful, really. It's not useful because it's maybe hard to use, just because the design hasn't been developed based on usage, right? They don't get that expanded user base. They're not building the right expanded features or functionality. They just don't have any of those pieces they need in order to have the successful business on the other side. So that's kind of what I want to leave you with. Now, I know we covered a lot, but I hope this helps you understand the steps you need to go through and the steps you cannot skip if your goal is to take your idea, package it into an app, and turn it into a successful business on the other side. Again, have the idea over here. You know what you want. You know what you want on the other side. All of this in the middle is packaging it up into an app. This is the process that you have to go through. So I hope that was helpful, and move forward. Make sure you go through these steps. Make sure you don't skip any. And thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.